Welcome. I'm Julian Flax, CTO of EQengineered. I have with me Russ Harding, our head of Microsoft practice, and we are talking about a topic that's come up a few times lately of the interface between Agile practices and pure engineer classic technology moments. Welcome, Russ.
Thank you, Julian. It's always a pleasure to be here.
So I know one of the things we were chatting recently was tickets. As a piece of background, I guess I've always found the conflict that can come up is Agile gets born out of a lot of focus on user-facing stories, things that meet product value directly.
Yep.
And on the other side, we all come from engineering backgrounds and tasks where we get things that are just make something change, make it adhere to an architectural principle, make it so that it won't blow up in 2 years in a way that we can't possibly explain, but involves a platform outside our product, these things. And there's some Agile applications where these issues don't come up. Maybe it's a startup and everything's fail fast. You're just going to write it literally as fast as you can. You're going to find if there's a market, and as and when there isn't, you're not going to put any more thought or lines of code into this.
Yeah.
But by the same token, a lot of the background of Agile does come from much longer running enterprise technology, from teams doing repeatable small iterations of an ongoing product that they're maintaining very meticulously. So it's not like good engineering practice predates Agile and has come in and ruined the whole plan of the play. So Russ, I wanted to turn to you first with the issue of tickets. Like, if you have pure tech tickets,
yep,
what are some guiding principles you think apply to them?
Well, that's a great question. I think that's something that a lot of these Agile projects struggle with. I've worked on a number of projects over the years, and handling technical debt in a way that works inside of the Agile framework is always a bit of a challenge. To your point, right? Agile very much tends to focus on the business and needs of the project. So a few things that tend to jump out at me is very typical with all of your other tickets, right? How can you make sure that you have enough detail in the ticket so that everybody understands exactly what the ask is? A lot of times, if you're building a ticket that is for the business case, we're going to have very clear acceptance criteria, very clear steps to reproduce a problem or steps to reproduce a new feature. You may have some sort of wireframes or something of that nature, where you may not have steps to reproduce on a technical issue, right? It could be something as simple as I need to implement caching on a particular API or something to that, or I need to update a library to a specific version, right? The question that I like to ask myself with business tickets is, how do I test that? Well, how do we test this, right? So how do you fill in those details? How do you make it very clear what it is that you're trying to do? What is the business value for doing it? Because often that is a big part of the ask. And it may be, what's the business value with a risk of not doing it? This could be a risk profile that you have to address. And how do we make sure that the technical item was done correctly? I updated my third-party library from version 2 to version 6. And these are the breaking changes, and these are how I mitigated, and how do we test that to make sure that we did mitigate those breakings? That's a big one in my mind.
I love something you hit on there. It was acceptance criteria, and I never think of this as directly. When you have a pure tech ticket, there is a purely technical description of did you succeed or not. Even if there are a range of values for the degree of success, at some level, it's like, okay, what defines whether it's done? The audience is another thing I always think of. So am I writing this for a junior person taking something on, and I just happen to be going into a bit of detail? You know, at which point I'll want to give them a kind of sense of time box of, if it gets more complex than this, fail, let somebody know.
Right.
But you get into these interesting ones. Sometimes I'm writing tickets and they're kind of for myself, or they're for one specific person with background. You know, I try and call that out in tickets. I've talked to Scrum Masters before on the right way of handling it, and it's like, well, more details better than less. And so, you know, if it's not for me, I'll try and leave it as, if I was doing this, I think I'd go with it like this. But yeah, sometimes the guts won't show themselves till somebody's working with it, which is always the tricky part.
You're absolutely right. I mean, these technical tickets will often start out with, I do the same thing. I'll create a ticket for, you know, in my own mind. I've written this thing that I know I need to do. It gets added to a sprint, but for some reason gets deprioritized. And for some reason it sits around for a little bit, and eventually gets to the point where, so listen, we need to get this done. I don't have bandwidth for this, so we need to have somebody else on the team. How can you write those tickets with a bit more detail so that others on the team can understand the problem? That's important anyway, because if you can explain it to another engineer, you can probably explain it to the business team and to QA a little bit better as well. So it's important to spend a little bit of time trying to make sure that, you know, these non-business tickets, these technical items, can be handed around to other people in the team. You know, and to your point, I absolutely love that practice of, you know, let's time box this a little bit, because some of these can be, we've all worked on them, right? They can all be rabbit's nests a little bit. We just keep going down and down and down, and you can be in here for a while. At what point do you pull the ripcord and you need to bail? And, you know, then come back and circle the wagons a little bit and have everybody talk to each other.
So I guess it comes back to that more detail is better. Spell out what you're doing. That whole, are you writing it for a specific person? Are you writing it for yourself? I think that's a really important detail to capture in there. It's okay to say that's what you're doing, and it helps others read the ticket if they know that was not spelled out in a way someone else is going to fully grok.
I think one last thing I want to maybe make a note of, being mindful of time, is reporting. Right? So oftentimes when I'm looking at tickets, one of the things that I try to tell people that I'm working with, or the teams that I'm working with, is when you're working in the ticket, add enough detail into that ticket so that when your manager's manager, somebody in the, you know, the C-suite somewhere is asking what's going on, if for some reason they happen to look at your ticket, or your manager is looking at your ticket because they've been asked a question, they don't have to hunt you down and figure out what's going on inside of that ticket. Like, can you add enough detail to that ticket? Can you also categorize these tickets very easily so that it's easily reportable by your Scrum Master and understandable by your manager in a certain similar circumstance? That this is a technical ticket, and there is, it's not necessarily a business ticket that the product owner is going to be able to articulate as well. It's a risk mitigation, or it's a technical update that needs to be done for security reasons or compliance or whatever it is, right? How can you categorize the ticket, and how can you properly document the ticket as to, you know, what's going on so that it can be handed to other people, but also where your current state is, so anybody can take a look at here and understand what's going on.
I think that's a really good point. The visibility side of Scrum or other Agile, just who's reading it and why, and what can they glean from it. You know, a related one that comes to mind is tickets that are user-facing. They're non-technical in nature, but there's different ways to do it. You know, the classic sprint breakdown, everyone gets opinions, and if we do this the wrong way, that means we've got throwaway stuff, we've got 2 versions of the code, we've failed to upgrade something that's desperately wanting to upgrade. That's an interesting one that I've experienced different approaches to. One of them being, you know, somebody even going as far as making 2 different versions of a story in the backlog. Do it this way, do it that way, because they needed that visibility for the reporting side to say, okay, it's worth it to the business to do this, but it's not worth it to the business to do it the right way. What does that mean?
Right.
Which is almost like capturing a piece of the throwaway proof of concept project into a non-throwaway big project. It's like this one thing, but tech debt's always around the corner when you go the wrong way.
It's always nipping at your heels as you're you're working on your project. It's always there.
So one that I know that you and I have both done different endeavors in, that's zooming up a little bit. The other place that happens is, where do you put your pure tech debt stories? Do they live inside a feature that you can kind of justify them in, or do you actually make completely technical projects? I know you've had one where, okay, there was a multi-tenancy angle, but sometimes it's just a pure upgrade of tech, just making sure we're up to date, where the ultimate scope of the thing in terms of testability is, did nothing change? That's literally what you're after. And how do you find those two differ when a project is from the outset, this is a technical project versus a little bit of that going on while achieving X user-facing goal?
Well, if it's a little bit of, we're trying to just add this technical in here, trying to categorize these tickets is always a bit of a challenge, right? I mean, you always, I shouldn't say always, but frequently in projects that I work on, I find that the Scrum Master or the product owner will just create this overarching epic that's tech debt, and everything just kind of gets dumped in there. I'm not necessarily always a fan of that, to be honest with you. I mean, I'd rather see some sort of epic that's tied to a release that actually talks about what are the risks and features and enhancements that we want to try to address for this particular, and then you can build your stories off of that, so you can actually see how things. And going back to your release notes, right? In your transparency to your users and being able to explain to the technology companies that you are adopting your software. We all have those forms that we have to fill out, right? When you've got a new client that's taking your software on premises and just using it. So how can I categorize this information in a way that can more easily go into my release notes? That's definitely one thing that I think about, right? On your more mature projects, if it's just a quick technical project, it's a back end. I mean, there's a lot of those out there. There's not as many of them out there as we might think about as far as technical projects, but I do think that there's a lot of value in very similar. You have to have some sort of way to be able to categorize this, because at the end of the day, we all have to report to somebody and be able to explain what it is that we spent our time on, and have it be able to be articulated to somebody that's not intimately involved in our project. And we want to be able to explain without having to really bring somebody up to speed from ground zero, and having things organized goes a long way.
Yeah, no, I feel like the thread that comes out of all these things is communication. We think of Agile as a productivity tool, which it really is. It's a framework to drive that. In some ways, the same way as pure tech done right is there to smooth extensibility and again get productivity out of everyone, but communicating it so that multiple people can be involved in the decisions and can actually compare story A to B and work out which one needs doing, which one wants doing. It's interesting stuff.
It is good stuff.
Well, thank you for those insights.
Absolutely.
Good conversation.
Yeah, I think it was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for bringing me up, and looking forward to continuing.
A pleasure.
Thank you.